Yes. Hi, I'm Chet Valasek from Valve. Thank you for attending our panel, Is Early Access Right for You? So this is going to be a conversation among the five of us. Hopefully I'm going to do very little talking and they'll do a lot of talking. But let me give you just a little background on early access. So traditionally at Valve, to test our games, we would bring outside people in to play them. We would take notes, watch them play, iterate, do it again the next week. And we'd get maybe through 10 people a week. And that's how we would make our games better. But for Dota 2 and Counter-Strike Global Offensive, we decided to use Steam itself to let people play and give us feedback on those games. That was really the first early access. And giving the community access to our games and getting their feedback made those better games, undoubtedly. That was just a great move to do. So when we saw that happening, we wanted to extend that to other developers. And so then we created early access. But so today, instead of us telling you about our success in early access with those games, I wanted to give a broader width of what different ways people approach early access and how it works for different people. So we have these four panelists here. So let me introduce them. First up is Justin Bailey. He comes to us from Double Fine, whose space-based DF9 is seeing great success on early access. You know, and Double Fine's been experimenting with many ways to fund and develop their games, so it's great to see them on early access. And next up is our local guy, Bob Berry. He's just across the bridge at Uber Entertainment. Their planetary annihilation is on early access, where they're experimenting with some interesting pricing models, to say the least. Next is Jamie Cheng. He joins us from Clay Entertainment. Their title, Don't Starve, started with community involvement and found a great reception on early access. And now we're just waiting to see when Incognito joins it. And lastly is Mark Morris from Introversion. You know, Darwinio was one of the first third-party games on Steam, and now they're seeing great success with Prison Architect on early access. And so, in fact, I'm going to start with Mark. You know, you guys have had multiple traditional releases on Steam, but for Prison Architect, you guys decided to go with early access. What was kind of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, sure. Well, early access didn't exist when we were first conceiving Prison Architect, so it didn't follow naturally. But we looked at Kickstarter and we saw that there was this new sort of trend within the industry that people were willing to pay for a product before it was finished. That was the sort of first fact, if you like, that informed the way that we started developing Prison Architect. And we thought to ourselves, we're not going to sell a game. We didn't think of it as selling early access to a game. We thought we're going to sell people the ability to look into our development process, give us feedback on the game, let us know what they think works, what they think doesn't work, and really be part of the game development process. And that's what we thought we were selling. So we did that. We launched Prison Architect. It blew our minds. We were so successful, even in those early days, which is one of the big benefits of early access as well, because you know very early on whether you've hit something that's going to work or whether you've hit something that you need to just leave and move on to the next title. And so we launched it on our own website, Kickstarter style, but we didn't go for Kickstarter. And if anyone wants to know why, ask me or ask us later, and I can explain the reasoning behind that. And then Valve launched early access and sort of mirrored the things that we'd been doing on our website very closely. So it was a very natural fit and easy for us to then put Prison Architect onto the early access program and go from there. And it's been very successful and it's worked very well for us so far.
Excellent.
So for Don't Starve, we wanted to experiment with releasing a game early because we've been doing for years. Clay's been around for 8 years, and all the games we've done, we finished it before we launched it, and we wanted to experiment with new ways of development. And it really was more about trying to get more feedback rather than making more money. And so we released it on the Chrome Web Store for free at first, actually. And just to get some people, and we kind of knew that there wasn't many people on there, and that was great. So we got more and more data on there. And also at that time, early access didn't exist either as well. But it was fantastic for us to get data, and then when we could prove that our game was solid and that people were going to enjoy it, that's when we started getting putting it on bigger and bigger channels and getting more and more eyes on it. And so when the numbers, we collected analytics on our game, and we saw that people were really enjoying our game through our forums, anecdotally, and our analytics. That's when we put it on Steam. And it was ridiculous, actually. It was far better than we expected, even though we knew that our game was solid, as shown.
So if I can just stick with you for 1 minute here. So you had success there, and now you have Incognito coming out. Why isn't it on early access yet? What's your kind of thought process there?
Sure. So just the same as in Don't Starve, we really wanted to make sure that our game was ready for a lot of people to play. So how I see it is that when people play your game or our game, if it's not good enough, they'll leave and they'll never come back. And we wanted to, early access is a way for us to figure out if our game is good. So we sell it on our own website first, and we don't even tell anybody about it. We don't really talk about it, so people find it organically. And so right now, Incognito, for example, is that. And in fact, for example, we're changing the name, I think today, of Incognito. And we can do that because it's not in people's minds already on Steam as an early access game. And we can experiment with it until it works before we say, okay, now all people can come in and enjoy the experience.
Does anyone else have when is the right time to put on early access? When should you put it on? Is there too early?
Yeah. I really think it's very difficult, right, to come and talk to you about early access because it's so new, it's difficult for all of us. But I think part of Prison Architect's success is that people played it, had a very good, enjoyable experience right from what we called Alpha 1 and told their friends about it and told journalists about it. We got that kind of marketing ball rolling. Now, Alpha 1, we had about sort of an hour's tailored gameplay in there plus a very, very poor sandbox. So you probably had a good kind of 3 or 4 hours gaming experience before you hit the end. And Prison Architect had been in development for about a year before we did that. Now, if our first launch onto early access had been a game experience that lasted 5 minutes or 30 minutes, it wouldn't have had enough for people to start talking about it and for it to start resonating. So I don't think from day one with your very first prototype you should launch it. You need to take the time for there to be a kind of meaty gaming experience to begin with to kind of seed your community and go from there. I don't know if any of you guys...
And interestingly enough, for us, it was actually kind of organic how we figured out. So we track retention, so we see whether or not people are coming back day in, day out. And we saw, say, about 20–30% of people were still playing 2 months later. But also, we saw streamers were starting to talk about the game more and more, even though we never really advertised the game. And so when we saw that, we thought, okay, now is a good time for us to put it on.
Yeah, I think you want to at least have a certain amount of value to the customer. If you've got value to deliver, why not get going, right?
You do if you're going to charge $90.
Well, we could talk about that a little bit. So for us, our timing for early access really dovetailed with our Kickstarter. We had promised that we're going to deliver an alpha in a certain time frame. And for us, it made sense that, hey, alpha, it's effectively early access. We're selling it on our website even after the Kickstarter. So why not just go ahead and launch our early access at the same time? But the $90 price point served two purposes. One, it protected our Kickstarter backers because that's what they paid to get in to the alpha. And if we were to price it at any less than that, it would be not fair to them. The community, we had some people that would defend that message in the community, and then we had some people that screamed and yelled and called us thieves and greedy and all that. But the numbers spoke for themselves. We were okay with that. The second thing it served was it was actually a natural gate into the community. We really didn't want to get inundated with like tons and tons of users. We were not ready to handle that. So for us, it was a nice natural barrier to keeping our population under control and not having it grow beyond what we can handle right now. Right now, we run all the servers for Planetary Annihilation, and those are expensive. We haven't fully optimized it. We can only run a certain number of players per box. So keeping that number artificially low is a good thing right now.
Can I talk to that? Yeah. Just I want to raise that as well. Because with us, it's very important, or I think any early access title, it's very important to think about how many customers you want to see the game at what part of the process. So for us, we got not heavily criticised, but criticised a little bit in the first sale when we discounted Prison Architect by people saying, "Hey, you know, I've given you some money, and now you're discounting it." But our view on that is exactly as you say. It's a kind of a gateway to control the number of players that you've got, because to begin with, you need people to understand that you're in alpha. You need people to understand the game might be buggy. You need them to be able to see through perhaps some minor kind of interface issues and give you really good, strong feedback. Now, you're not going to get that if you've got huge swathes of players. You're not going to be able to sift through it. So this concept of kind of high price at the beginning dropping allows you to control the flow of players, which is very important because it allows you to control your relationship with them. And also, in terms of kind of value, I don't agree with what was said about protecting people that paid money early. I think, ultimately, you'll be able to get Prison Architect for a penny in a Humble Bundle, right? But that's going to be in 3 or 4 years' time, obviously subject to Humble Bundle working with this, but I hope they will. But if you want to play it now, you're going to pay more. And it's like you have to pay more to go and see a film in the cinema, but then eventually it'll be on TV and you'll pay it for free. So what you're paying for is being the first person or amongst the first people to play the game. And I think that's a legitimate thing to charge for.
Yeah, I can talk about Space a little bit. You know, our decision to go early access, kind of actually going back to an earlier question, was actually the exact opposite of what happened with Mark. Is that we had a very successful Kickstarter, and we were looking at like what was happening with Prison Architect, and we're like, hey, this is like a Kickstarter campaign, but it's one that never ends, and that looks very appealing. So, and in general, just Double Fine getting into early access, we were really enjoying having a closer kind of relationship with our community. Our community has followed us for like the 12 years the studio's existed. And we've always had somebody kind of in between us. It's always been like a publisher in between us and our community and communicating. And so this experience with Kickstarter to go out and reach out to our community, you know, gave us a taste of what that was like. And we really liked it. We liked having the actual real-time kind of feedback from what we're working on to, you know, from the community who's really passionate about the whole process. And so we actually then morphed into, we had this Amnesia Fortnight, which is basically our annual game jam, which we did behind doors. Last year we decided to do that, like actually stream the whole thing, have the public vote on which of the prototypes they liked that we would try to make into games. And at the end, we gave anybody who voted the prototypes to play. And so last year that was Space that came out of that. And then we found funding through the Indie Fund. And early access just really fit because the type of game it was, but also we wanted to get our community involved early so they could be, you know, give us feedback and inform us on some of our design decisions.
So for Don't Starve, we sold it at 20% off and gave it 2 for 1. So we did the absolute opposite of charging more. We charged like less than half, I guess you could say. And our perspective on it was that, you know, I understand your guys' perspective, and I think I in some ways agree with it, but also in my mind, thank you for playing my shitty unfinished game that's really kind of broken, you know? And you know, when I think back on it, would Don't Starve have been more successful if we charged a higher price in revenue, maybe not units or whatever? I personally don't believe so. I believe that Don't Starve was a success because people were playing it, they were happy about their price, they were talking about the game a lot, they said it's cheap, you should try it, and then there was this huge wave of people who are playing our game and continually talking about it. And so there is a different way of looking at it, and from my perspective, I have, you know, I also saw people saying, yeah, but it was 2 for 1. It's buggy, but it's 2 for 1. You know, so that sort of thing also happens. It's kind of complicated. That's kind of how I feel.
Well, so because this has come up now a couple of times with the bugginess and the state of the game. I mean, how do you set expectations? I mean, I think we just recently found out that Dean Hall from DayZ fame is really bad at writing warnings because that didn't really work. Sold 1 million copies when he told you it was a crappy game you shouldn't play. So how do you set expectations so people understand that there's going to be bugs, there's going to be problems?
All I know is that on the Planetary Annihilation box, I'm going to put "Do not buy this game." It doesn't work. It's not buggy because then we'll sell 1 million units apparently.
Right.
Like,
yeah. I mean, for us, when it was buggy, we didn't sell it on Steam. that was kind of what we did, right? And then when it was on Steam, it was a solid thing that always just improved, and it was, we're really careful about certain things like their save games. We're really, really careful about that. So when it was crash, it would crash nicely, and they could still recover their game, that sort of thing, right? And I think that, Prison Architect has that same kind of thing where they're kind of careful about that experience.
Yeah, and in one way, you got to look at early access can mean different things for different developers. In some ways, it's simply a pre-order because you can, or you're testing a market out to see if the prototype you put together makes sense. Is there a market for this? You might be needing, game analytics feedback. It's like, I need to get this into the hands of lots of users so I can, iterate on the game. It's a different. It supports lots of different strategies. I think one of the most important ones, though, is it's a new source of funding, essentially, for small developers. You put together a prototype with a small team, stick it up on early access, and, you might sell enough in terms of, you can call them pre-orders, to fund the rest of the game, right? And that's a pretty powerful thing. And in my opinion, the more avenues that independent developers have for funding their projects, the better.
Yeah, on the funding side for us, it's no secret we've been experimenting with a lot of different models, and we're actually trying to figure out the last AAA budget game we did was Brutal Legend. Since then, we broke into 4 teams and did smaller indie games, and we're still looking. How do we push the production values in fun games more? So. We have Kickstarter. We've had some investment through Indie Fund. We've had actually some private project-based investors. And we're looking at potentially a hybrid that utilizing these different funding models now so we can get those bigger budget games. Not AAA, I think. Actually, Tim's coining a new term, which I'll just test out here because that's kind of what we're doing. He's going with triple I, is what we're trying to say for our games going forward. So.
Yeah, no, maybe
that
not.
went down like a lead balloon, didn't it? Coming back to communicating, I think I think you have to be very honest with what your objectives are going on to early access. And when we made our first Prison Architect video, like Deel, we were telling everybody this is buggy, this isn't a complete experience, this isn't finished in any stretch of the imagination. I think a lot of people don't know that, don't care, and kind of buy into it anyway. But we're very careful when we put an alpha out there to make sure that we're not fundamentally breaking the game. So even though we're in development, I don't see it as it's not completely raw stuff. There are feature sets within Prison Architect which are not ready for the next alpha launch, so we don't put them in there. We control it quite carefully, and on the few occasions where we have totally broken the game, we fixed it within a couple of days rather than our normal schedule, which is once a month we push out a new update, because it's very important for us that even though it is early access, it's still a good and strong and meaningful experience. And I think that's probably part of it. I think if someone comes along and thinks, I really don't have a clue what I'm doing with this game and I'm just going to throw it out into early access, I think it wouldn't get any traction and it would fail and die away, I think.
Well, and some of your bugs actually helped you, right?
Yeah. I mean, some of the bugs, before all this, we just started tweeting the bugs because the way we're developing Prison Architect is it's an old sort of style system simulation game. So we create a new simulation for something, I don't know, moving laundry around the prison, and we add that in, and we don't actually know how it's going to interact with other aspects. And so you get humorous bugs. We had bugs with prisoners dying on toilets and never being removed, and all sorts of little things like this that actually make us laugh. And if they make us laugh, they're going to make the players laugh. So sometimes we'll leave them in, we'll tweet about them, but that's worked really well for us and with Prison Architect.
In terms of messaging for us, we have full-time community people to manage those expectations. And I also, in regards to bug fixes, I don't think we've ever pushed out an update and not done a hot fix the next day. And so, that happens to us all the time.
Yeah, our messaging, like in Planetary Annihilation, when you boot it up, the very first thing you get is a video that pops up right on the dashboard that says, it's a talking head saying, this game is not done. And trying to be very, very clear about it doesn't help. Well, it doesn't help. People really, if it's in their hands, as far as they're concerned, it's not going to get much better. It's.
Well, I mean, you're always going to have some outliers that will. But in general, do you think you get a little bit of a break and almost, if it's not done, hey, that that means that every bug that's in the game could possibly be fixed?
It really depends on your community. Like, if you will have some champions in your community, like strong advocates who understand the messaging that can actually, deliver it internally. And then you're going to have the naysayers. You're going to have the people that are just doom and gloom on the forums. And in my opinion, it's kind of important to curate that message in your forums, because it doesn't take but a few bad apples can really kind of spoil the perception.
I will say that in our forums was actually really, really clean, and people were very, very positive. And we worked for that from the start. Maybe it's our pricing model, I don't know. Right? We were very, very generous, of course. And also, we pushed out bi-weekly updates, so it was actually really, really tight. And so they saw improvements very, very quickly, right? And possibly that's also what you're doing. I actually don't know. We saw people being quite positive. It was actually not about the bugs that people were complaining about. It was about fundamental systems. And this game, the number one comment we got, besides we want multiplayer, is the game is too easy. That's the number one comment that we got, right? And this is why. And they had an analysis on it, which was awesome. That was what we wanted. So.
Okay, well, so my PowerShell also might be is you have a competitive game, a single player game. Is every game good for early access?
Bob and I had this argument on Twitter just before we came in here about this, and what I said was that I don't believe that Mark and the Ninja should have been on early access. I believe that it was an experience that I wanted players to have completely, and the first time they play through and have that full experience rather than an incomplete experience. So there was no time in that process that I thought it should go on early access.
Yeah, and I respectfully disagreed. But to take an even more extreme example, I said I challenge you, give me one game that doesn't belong on early access. And what was it, Gone Home, right? Where something that's like super narrative, you get one chance to experience it, and if you screw up the ending, everything's screwed up. People are not going to want to play through it again, right? And I totally, I understand where you're coming from, but my response, I think, on Twitter was like, if the game's not ready for early access until it's basically done, I said, well, that's your date for early access. When it's done, put it up there, have it up there for a couple of weeks at a higher price point, lower price point too, for whatever you want to do, and then come out of that. And then I think what we settled on was, well, that's not really early access, right? That's more like a pre-order with beta access or something to that effect. The point of early access is to get your game out there 3 months in advance and have the community see you iterating on it over time. And so when you define it like that, then yeah, there's absolutely games that don't fit.
And in that sense, the way I can think about it is that Prison Architect is like the prototypical good early access game because it's very componentized, and I can add something and it works, and I can add something and it works. And I would say, for example, that Mark and the Ninja is one where all the systems, when the stealth failed, it failed hard, and it was frustrating, and it wasn't good, and all the mechanics had to work all cohesively together. So we either had it all together or it totally didn't work. So adding in a little mechanic at a time, I think would have ruined the game. And in fact, the way I see it is, from an analogy standpoint, Don't Starve was kind of like a chia pet. It kind of grows and you're grooming it as it goes along and gets bigger and bigger, but then you groom it. And then Mark and the Ninja is like this finely shaped blade, tuned blade. And that's the kind of difference that I see of what's good in early access and what's not.
Yeah, but I do believe that there is value to some amount of customers in seeing that process that you went through where things really didn't work. And if you were willing to actually communicate, here's what we're trying this week. Wow, this really fell apart because of X, Y, and Z, and actually explain, which is a lot of work on its own. If you're willing to go through that, I think that could be an appropriate type of experience. One thing I don't want to do anymore is try to project what I think is valuable onto the customers. Like, they'll tell you what's valuable to them, right? They'll speak, if you're a free-to-play game, they'll speak with their dollars and buying certain things. And I think many times the value for them could be simply, I have access to this before my friends do. And it's just it's a status symbol, and who am I to say that that's not an appropriate value or something, right?
Yeah, we went through this just recently with Broken Age. where we had initially thought about, its early access and decided down the road for various reasons that it was actually more of a season pass. One of the things we found out going through this process, though, is like these labels that we apply are pretty loose, and it's kind of everything's a work in process, which is what I really love about like Valve's approach, not only to obviously software but the hardware that they're doing, and it's basically our approach too. And so, when we look at the whole publishing function and taking Broken Age as an example, that's a game where you're not going to have continual update of the contents. So you're not going to be adding new features. It's a story. It's meant to be told completely, so you have the whole experience. It's timed that way, so you'll enjoy the whole experience. However, like we had an opportunity where we knew anybody that's a backer in the room. Are there backers in the room? Just curious, like Broken Age. Sweet, thank you for backing. So if you played the game, we actually, the end of Act 1 is actually pretty satisfying experience in itself. So once we saw that, we actually got mock reviews done for some of our friends that were former journalists. And we wanted to get those reviews out there, and something to think about with your game if you're deciding to do this in early access is currently, if it's in early access, it's really not being reviewed. And if the reviews are something that actually help the uptake and more people to buy the game, maybe early access is not the right place for that.
So Justin, you have the microphone. So like for Space, when do you decide, hey, we're in early access, we're doing great, and now we're finished? When do we go from early access to a release game?
Yeah, so it's that decision. It's a little fuzzy. It is one where the community is very involved in it. There's actually there for sure is in our minds, like, and I'm speaking for the development team. I'm not a developer. The development team actually couldn't make it today. But there's a feature list, a minimum feature list they have in their minds that they like to do. But it's being informed, and I like to use the word informed by our community, because if the community is directing it and they're making all the decisions, then what are the game developers doing basically? But an informed is like, hey, this looks like a great feature. We never thought about that, and that's something awesome to add. So it is kind of this morphing process. We have in mind what kind of the minimum game would be, and we're not there yet, and we know that, and we kind of take it in 3-month swashes right now. So
one thing I was going to say about the $90 price point again was that it's really amazing that Valve even let us do it, right? Any other platform holder would have said we're batshit insane and not let that happen. But Valve's a company that's just all about experimentation, right? And when we were talking to our account manager, he's like, "That's an interesting experiment. We should try it. Why not?"
The delta was large enough that we could learn something.
Yeah,
yes.
and I think you guys have got some decent amount of data from that.
Yes, it was interesting.
Don't Starve was the first game out of early access, correct? I
believe so.
I believe it was. And so we joke that we were the first to stop making early access money. So we should have continued going. But we chose to do that because we had an end in mind on what the experience was supposed to be. And then we actually still added 6 months of updates. And in retrospect, should we have only added 3 months, or should we have planned it a little bit differently? Perhaps, but for our team, the important thing was that it was toward our vision. It was as we wanted Don't Starve to be, and I think Justin had it exactly right, which is that we used our community to inform our decisions and to prove our theories. This is how we believe that people are going to be experiencing our game. Is that true? Is that what they're feeling about it? And then ultimately, our team wants to work on more games and wants to be creative in new ways. And so when we felt like, from a design perspective, we had explored it to a very high degree, that was a time where we felt, okay, now's the time to try something else.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point to think about and talk about, because I see it as one of the downsides. There aren't many downsides to early access, but I think this is one of them, that ultimately what we want to do at Introversion is produce brilliant final games. that you look back on in the future, and the mechanisms that put those games into the world shouldn't really be that apparent. The game itself should just stand on its own 2 feet and be fantastic. Now, for us, we have a minimum list of features that we want to include for Prison Architect. We have a vision, but it's not a concrete vision. And I think as game developers, most of us know, we don't really have concrete visions when we start. It's quite rare. You go on this meandering path and a game kind of drops out at the end. And so for us, trying to understand exactly when we need to draw that line and transition away from early access and say, right, Prison Architect is now done. And maybe we'll do the same thing, say, it is now done. We are calling this version 1, and then continue and do a 3-month update or something, like we would have done in the old days, as part of just that kind of closure on the product, rather than switching from being a company that makes video games to a company that just spends all of its life in this kind of service provision of, oh, well, now let's put cats in PA, now let's put mice in PA, Despite what Bob tells you, PA stands for Prison Architect, not Penny Arcade and not Planetary Annihilation either. Prison Architect, PA.
Well, I guess that's interesting. So what are you guys' thoughts on as you release, and it goes from that point where you have customers that have grown to expect updates, that you've got them hooked on a monthly cycle for you, every 2 weeks for you. What do you see the customer's reaction then when you turn off that spigot and the game they have is the game they have, and it's a great game, but they know that they're not going to be cared for in the same way anymore?
Well, from my perspective, I think that's great. We messaged it early and often that there was going to be an end to this, and we gave them what we felt were good estimates when we felt like we could give good estimates, and we kept communicating. And to me, if I keep on updating Don't Starve, I think that there is going to be a point where people get sick of it, and I would rather stop it before they get sick of it and have a new game come out for them to enjoy, than to just keep on.
Yeah, we're obviously coming at it from the other end of that, where we don't really call Planetary Annihilation game as a service. We've got this new thing that we've kind of coined, which is like game as a platform. We're actually trying to build an ecosystem and a content creation platform around Planetary Annihilation. And yes, we're going to be operating it as a service, but from the community's point of view, there's a workshop-like content creation ecosystem there. Not just for hats and stuff like that, but for like mods. We want to support a really robust mod community. For a game like Total Annihilation, I mean, that's probably where we're going to have our longevity is mod support.
You said Total Annihilation.
Planetary Annihilation, sorry.
Well,
we can edit that out in post.
Yes. Well, so actually, Jimmy, that was kind of my question for me. For me, it was like, have you thought of, while you think you're done and that you've made your kind of statement with your game, of opening it up to the community and allowing the community to keep modding the game, and those people who are into that are able to extend the life and really kind of keep the game going into maybe a place that you wouldn't want to go or would want to go, but you're not bound to that.
Yeah, so we do have a modding system in Don't Starve, and I had a hand in writing it, which was my first programming in a long time. So sorry for the people who are using it, I guess. They fixed it actually later on. So, but what we used that for was, one, for a long-term. Sure, they can change it the way they want, and that's great. That's really awesome, and it was a good experiment. And also, there were valid discussions on, for example, this game is too brutal for me, and I would like to be able to revive in this game. And if people who haven't played Don't Starve, once you die, you die. And so we allowed the modding so that people could change the game experience the way they wanted without us adding a billion little options in our game, right? And so that we could feel great in executing our vision and still allowing people to just modify it just slightly the way that they want.
Is anyone else planning on supporting that way? Because I would like to put cats in the prison, because that helps the prisoners.
You're not in the alpha, are you? You would have known that our modding system launched in the last alpha.
I played it earlier. I haven't played it recently.
Yeah, we've got a modding system in, and we'll continue to develop that. We've done that with all our games, and there's nothing new. I don't think that's particularly anything new about early access. It's just extending the life when we're done with it. But yeah, it's definitely in there and will continue. Yeah, cool. You can put cats in.
Awesome. Well, so I think that's kind of ties up. We've gone from the very start. When do you start using it? How you're doing updates to release and then a post-release. And so this is 4 examples of early access. But every game's different. Every game, how you approach early access, what you do, when you do it, is going to be unique to that game. And so what we want to do is open up the floor now to questions. And so if you have questions that these 4 perspectives can help, either shed on your own game or their own games, just ask a question. Good. You can choose. I'm not choosing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm currently working on a game which has a lot of narrative content, but the gameplay itself is distinct, such the way as probably Planetary Annihilation probably have a narrative that overarches it. I don't know if you're. I haven't seen the game. Okay. Anyway,
robots blowing each other up.
Good for that. So I've got part of that, which is like robots blowing each other up, right? But then I have a narrative on top of that. Would it be possible to do? Do you think it would be a good strategy to go to early access and show them the core game, say like with levels that may not actually be in the final game, but like levels that are actually fun to play, and do that in order to get that kind of feedback, and then say, okay, when I launch, I'm going to show you the narrative, which is really cool.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I mean, if any data that's going to help you make that core game experience more fun, and provided you're actually collecting the data, analyzing it, and taking action on it, it's worth its weight in gold. I mean, yeah.
And will Valve allow that kind of game to get on early access?
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
Yeah, trust me, we ship Planetary Annihilation very early.
Yeah, I think if you go on early access now, you're going to see a lot of variety of. I mean, I think there's probably a couple people who actually think they want to test their finished product, and get feedback on it and adjust it from there. And it's a really good place for that, where you can get a lot of feedback. It's always, we joke, we get the most testing of our game the day we release it, because all of a sudden we go from how many ever people we can ever get to play it to the day it's out there is just scales so greatly.
First of all, thanks guys, this is incredibly useful. It kind of comes back to sort of putting a bit more of a detail on one of the questions earlier. If you were to think about your game when you would put it on early access versus, there's obviously a lot of talk about when actually a game's finished, but when it's finished, so 100%. Could you put a number roughly on that and say, well, it's 10% or it's 30% or it's 50%? I know it's all very vague, but that's kind of just trying to put something on it which would help, I think, a bit. Thanks.
I couldn't put a number because, in part, the scope of the game is going to be determined by your early access success. So you might have a plan for a game and suddenly that scope might double because you know that you've got the revenue and the support to do it. I think what you need to be thinking about is the player's experience and your plan with Alpha and how often you're going to be putting updates out there and what those updates are going to be. So it could be the case that there's quite a reasonable amount of boring systems work that you need to put into place before you go into alpha or release on early access so that you can start updating systems and testing things. Because if there's as I was saying before, if there's no gameplay experience, I don't think it's going to get any traction. They have to be able to play for a reasonable amount of time. And then your next update, I believe, well, maybe not your next update, because you can, and we see people that do, very fast, just micro iterations, and not every early access player will play every early access build, but you need to have progression, and players need to see the game changing. So it could be the case that you're relatively far down the development kind of path before you launch into early access, so that you can see what the route is to keep that kind of experience curve and keep your players interested all the way up to launch.
No, but I love Strikes Through Zero. Great game, so awesome job.
I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on early access regarding console versus PC. And the relevance of this question is that Steambox is on the horizon, and this is definitely kind of a changing climate. So just curious to hear your thoughts.
I might take that real quick, because Double Fine, we're basically PC, Mac, Linux. We're trying to come out with all of our games on that platform, and so obviously with Linux, That's something we're just dedicated going forward is having a Linux version that'll play natively. So, and then to some extent, we're actually looking at the consoles incrementally. So, which is the same way we actually look at mobile. But primarily, our games are being built and developed on PC. So,
I think with traditional consoles, like I think those kind of gamers are going to be less likely to deal with that kind of like brokenness in games and you know, a lot of these people are coming from the old disc-based thing where you get like basically one shot to get it right when you print that disc and you ship it. And so usually the games have gone through crazy TCR processes and they're pretty locked down. It's going to be interesting to see now that the consoles are more connected, you've got more live services, and you can hopefully, presumably ship updates, you know, more iteratively. We'll probably see more bugs and broken stuff and having to ship updates. My gut says console gamers are less accepting of a lot of these things than the hardcore PC gamers.
If the consoles allowed me to do the updates constantly, then I would be happy to do so in a cost-effective manner. That is to say, if I'm not going through cert every single time, you know, that sort of thing, then I'd be happy to do so. I personally, I think that if we set the expectations correct, the answer is maybe it will work. But you know, I don't think it's not. It won't work. You know, that's kind of where I'm going with it.
Yeah, and one thing that definitely doesn't work is having a certain type of game where players do expect updates and then not being able to deliver them, which is what we experienced with Monday Night Combat on 360.
Hi, I just wanted to say that you know, I own all of you guys' respective early access games.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, no problem. But by that, mainly because, you know, I'd followed you before and I'd played your previous games. I own a lot of those too, and you know, so I knew who you were, and so when something came out on early access, I knew I could, you know, I guess expect a certain level of fun out of the game, you know, before I plopped down the money. What I mean to say is that you guys are all fairly or reasonably or very successful, and you have followings. And how much of that do you think was a contributing factor to your success on early access? And also, do you have any advice besides make your game good for people that, you know, might not have that following? Thanks.
I can share a little story about Don't Starve because Don't Starve, I believe, has a very different audience than Mark and the Ninja. For Don't Starve, when we launched it on the Chrome Web Store, we had pretty good success. We didn't have, you know, the success we had on Steam yet, but you know, there was a knitting mom who played our game, and we saw her. How we found out about her is she has this blog every week that she does on knitting, and that week she didn't have a blog because she played Don't Starve too much. And instead, she spent the whole time on her blog talking about this game that you play in your browser that you die a lot, and, you know. And it was fantastic. So for me, it was really validating that it wasn't our name that sold it. So because obviously not Mark and the Ninja player.
Yeah, and obviously for Planetary Annihilation, we were coming off the Kickstarter. And the Kickstarter served a similar purpose that you could use early access for, which was to validate the market, to make sure that there is an audience for the thing that you're building. And if you'll recall in our Kickstarter video, we didn't actually have any game to show. We had produced nothing but a gameplay visualization video, which was all done in 3D Studio Max. But we said, this is kind of what it's going to look like, or actually it's going to look at least this good. I think we can make it look better, but it's going to look at least this good. And you know, we made visual promises, the gameplay promises in just the things that we showed, and that was enough for the market to say, yeah, we want that. And I think, you know, you can do something similar with a compelling prototype, playable prototype through early access. Doesn't have to be a complete game. Doesn't have just enough core mechanics where people feel like they get value and they have fun, and you know, that's your market test.
Sorry, I'd just like to add to that quickly, is that Don't Starve was a completely different game when we pitched it to ourselves. And so if we kickstarted it, it would not have been a success because it completely changed. So, you know, for our experience, you know, we needed that time to really iterate on the gameplay and all that. So it's interesting how the different processes go.
I think you make a very valid point about our reputations. perhaps going before us, which is why people trust us to deliver a finished game. But it comes, if you are brand new and no one's heard of you, this is why early access is so good. If you craft a really good prototype, and again, it comes back to picking your moment when you're going to launch it, but if you do craft something which is really wonderful and you get it onto early access and people start playing it, the Steam audience and the network and the social things, and we've heard marketing tools, you will get picked up and you will be able to get the ball rolling. It didn't used to be like that, but it is now. So even though our reputation's helped, I don't think there's any reason why new people can't break in.
So I would potentially respectfully disagree with that, and the only reason is because you can see like this is a very popular panel. Early access is getting a lot of traction. You're likely to see competition increase. You're seeing traditional publishers actually jump in there where they potentially would have canceled the game before, and they have AAA production values, and now they're potentially putting it on early access to see if they can revive it or change the dev cycle. And I think it's an amazing question. I think it's a great one. It's one we're mulling over at Double Fine, which is how do you enable indies to thrive? It's one also that I don't know how many people are actually in the marketing meeting, but there was a lot of advice given in there that I thought was really good, which is basically getting to know other indies, going to trade events, and networking basically the hell out of it. And potentially, partnering up with someone who's already done it before, either informally or informally, and then they can give you advice and potentially on the steps that you can take before you would actually go to early access. But I'm not sure it would be the first step. I think there's a couple steps before that.
It's the same way you would get on Steam traditionally. It depends on the process. I can talk to you afterwards on it. I'd have to actually have you talk with Eldon Krall, who's supposed to be here, but he's not. He is around, and we can ask him. He'll go through the process. I don't want to talk off. We have time for one more question.
Yeah, I was curious, especially for Prison Architect and Don't Starve. You guys kind of talked about keeping your users kind of in control early, and then. When you guys introduced it on early access, you guys probably saw a real increase in sales and your user base. Was that a problem, or like any advice you'd give? Because it seems like it'd probably be a pretty significant growth. And did you see that as a reliability?
He's over there. Yeah.
Over here.
It wasn't a problem for us. We'd had experience in the past of relatively large forums, lots of people. We had infrastructures in place to be able to cope with the amount of feedback that we were getting. We did have some issues with some systems failing, but that's more of a technical thing. In terms of the amount of feedback that came back, it comes back to the fact that the Prison Architect Alpha that launched on Steam it had a reasonable amount of testing because we'd sold some from our website before. So the experience that people were getting was quite robust at the beginning, and I think that was very important. Because if it hadn't been robust and we'd suddenly had that spotlight on us, there would have been loads of people complaining and shouting. But it wasn't. And this I think, is probably, if I was going to give you one kind of takeaway, it would be to ensure that you test the hell out of the first version that you put on early access. It isn't QA for free.
For us, it was actually almost exactly the same. We had been testing it ourselves for a long time. What did happen was we were collecting data to try to give us a bit more information, and all our analytics fell over. It just all barfed. And we never got that data back because it was totally barfed. And we had to rebuild it from scratch. So that was the number one bad thing.
Okay. Well, thank you, first of all, for you guys for showing up and helping. Justin, you gave me the perfect transition, and I dropped the ball to the end, but Justin's correct. These guys have 4 examples of people on early access. There's a bunch of people on early access now. You can contact those devs if you have questions. You can talk with them. We're not all competitors. We're all making games. Everyone wants to play your game. If you have a game out there and you want to have it in early access or it's on early access, let me know about it. I didn't even know Gary had made Rust when I started playing Rust, only to find that out. Right? Just had a ton of fun doing that. So engage with the other devs around here these next couple days. Talk with them. Everybody's trying to help each other. And remember, what's happening right now today is going to change, and it's going to keep adapting, and And so you have to keep trying to learn more about what's going on. Just don't take what someone did here and try to replicate it. Learn what they did, learn from it, and then apply it to your own. So thank you.